Dinner that night seemed normal, but the heavy silence carried something strange. The father, his face scarred by time and life's struggles, sat at the head of the table, observing the disdainful looks he received from his own son. He didn't say much, just smiled silently, as if harboring a secret no one could imagine. The son, overcome by the arrogance that youth and the illusion of power gave him, decided to provoke. In front of his wife and family, he pointed at his father and said loudly, almost laughing, "He's a nobody, an old man who's never achieved anything." The words echoed like a knife cutting the air. His wife laughed lightly, complicit in the mockery, and everyone felt the tension rise. But the father, instead of shrinking from the humiliation, calmly sat back in his chair, took a deep breath, and smiled. This smile carried something mysterious, as if announcing that this would be the last day he would be treated as invisible. The son's wife, confident in the position she believed she had achieved, cast a triumphant look. To her, the man sitting at the back of the table was merely a burden, a detail that still insisted on existing, but would soon be erased by the inheritance they believed was already in his hands. The son, laughing at his own cruelty, raised his wine glass as if toasting the end of his father's authority. But the father remained motionless, serene, like a chess player who has predicted his opponent's defeat several moves in advance. No one realized that in that silence lay a force greater than any spoken word. While the others celebrated their humiliation, he only thought of the document kept under lock and key, ready to overturn the entire table. That will was more than a piece of paper. It was the verdict of a carefully prepared plan to ensure ingratitude would be punished irreversibly. The atmosphere began to change as the father slowly reached into his jacket pocket. Eyes fixed on him, some with disdain, others with impatience. The son ironically commented, "Are you going to take old coins out of there? Is that all you have to show?" But what came out was nothing they expected. He placed on the table a small antique keychain, engraved with symbols only he knew. Silence fell. The son and daughter-in-law exchanged glances, uncomprehending. But the father simply smiled again, as if holding in his hands the key to something far greater than they could imagine. Every glance directed at that object seemed to carry questions, but he was in no hurry. Time, in that instant, began to turn in his favor, and the arrogance of the others began to melt into doubt. It was then that the father decided to speak, his calm, deep voice echoing in the room. "You think you know who I am, but you don't even know half my story. You laughed at me as if I were a nobody, but you forgot that silence holds secrets greater than vanity can bear." The son tried to interrupt, but his wife held him back, sensing something greater was about to be revealed. The father continued, "While you looked at me with contempt, I built in silence. While you called me weak, I kept proof, contracts, memories of every effort I made. You forgot who built this family from nothing." The air grew thick, almost suffocating. The son's mask of superiority was beginning to crack, but there was still much more to be revealed. The father stood leaning against the table, and everyone fell silent. "You think you already know the fate of the inheritance, but everything you believe is a lie." The daughter-in-law's eyes widened, and the son swallowed hard, feeling his grip on the situation slipping from his grasp. The old man walked slowly to a nearby sideboard and pulled out an aged leather briefcase. Inside, the weight of the truth awaited. This document was signed many years ago, and within it is written what you never imagined. This family's wealth, every penny, every piece of property, does not belong to those who despised me. It belongs to those who honored me. The impact was like a direct blow. The son stood abruptly, trying to protest, but his voice was shaky, revealing the fear that was beginning to take hold of him. The father opened the folder before everyone and displayed the pages of the will. His eyes shone not with cruel revenge, but with justice achieved. "You called me nobody, but I decide who gets everything, and it won't be you two." The son staggered, as if the ground had disappeared from beneath his feet. His wife, who had previously laughed arrogantly, now stared at the document with a pale face, unable to hide her panic. This revelation shattered in seconds the castle of illusions they had built on their contempt for their father. Dinner ended, not with laughter, but with the bitter weight of defeat. The old man silently left, keys in hand, leaving behind the certainty that he would never again be seen as a nobody. The atmosphere was still tense from the last dinner, but no one dared bring up the subject. The son and daughter-in-law tried to act as if nothing had happened, hiding their discomfort behind forced smiles. However, the father knew this was only the surface of a much deeper game. The true poison came not only from his son's contempt, but from the silent manipulation his wife had been nurturing for years. With her soft voice and calculated gestures, she had turned her husband's heart against his own father. Every twisted phrase, every lie whispered in intimate moments had been a piece on the chessboard of destruction. But at that dinner, the carefully constructed plot would begin to unravel before everyone. The father patiently waited for the perfect moment to reveal what he had been keeping hidden, the lie that sustained all that arrogance. As the table was set, the father watched discreetly. He saw his son's wife acting her perfection, offering dishes, praising her husband, as if he were the pillar of the family. But the gleam in her eyes betrayed her anxiety. She knew she was hiding something that, if it came to light, would shatter her entire image as an exemplary wife. The father, silent, took a deep breath, remembering every night he'd been called a dead weight, every venomous word spoken behind his back. And now, ironically, it would be her own mouth that betrayed him. Calmly, the old man raised his glass and said, "Today I want to make a toast, but not to what you think. I want to toast the truth because it always finds a way, even when you try to hide it." His daughter-in-law's gaze wavered, and everyone around sensed something unexpected was about to happen. The son, trying to maintain control, smiled nervously. "Dad, we don't need to be dramatic. We're just having family dinner." But his voice didn't even convince himself. The father then pulled an envelope from his pocket, folded and slightly yellowed. "You think I'm naive that I didn't realize what happened all these years, but every lie leaves traces, and I've learned to follow each one." The silence became absolute. He opened the envelope and revealed photos and printed messages, concrete proof of his wife's manipulation. Messages in which she spoke ill of her father-in-law, called him useless, and even instructed her husband to treat him with contempt to speed up access to the inheritance. The son, upon reading the words, paled. His expression of pride turned to confusion and anger. The lie that sustained his arrogance was now laid bare for all to see. The wife tried to defend herself, her voice trembling as she said, "That was misinterpreted. It means nothing." But the evidence was undeniable. The messages were clear, filled with contempt and manipulation. The father, firm, didn't need to raise his voice. "You destroyed the father-son relationship with your venomous words. You painted me as a nobody, but it was only to feed your thirst for power. Now everyone here can see your true colors." The panicked daughter-in-law sought her husband's gaze, but he looked away, ashamed, feeling the ground give way beneath his feet. This was the first time he realized he had been merely a pawn in the cruel game of the woman who claimed to love him. Dinner, which should have been another stage of humiliation, turned into a courtroom, and the lies began to crumble one by one. The son, overcome with despair, stood up and shouted, "This can't be true, you're making it up." But as he flipped through each page, each piece of evidence, his voice broke. The father, silent, watched the fear settle in the couple's eyes. "You wanted to reduce me to nothing, but it was your lies that brought you here. I didn't have to lift a finger, I just let the truth work for me." The impact was devastating. The previously arrogant daughter-in-law now trembled with shame and rage. The son, realizing how manipulated he had been, didn't know whether to shout at his father or his own wife. The father, however, stood up, gathered the evidence, and said only one sentence that echoed like a sentence: "The truth always wins, and you will learn this in the most painful way possible." Silently, he left again, leaving behind the weight of the revelation that could never be erased. The silence of the night still hung over the house after the lies were revealed, but the son, blinded by pride, decided not to be shaken. Deep down, he believed he could still control the situation, that his father, with his advanced age, was nothing more than a tired man, incapable of truly reacting. This false confidence made him chuckle softly, believing that everything would soon return to normal. But he didn't know that his father's calm concealed the exact moment of change. Revenge, cold as winter, was already prepared to be served before everyone. That night would be remembered not as another attempt at humiliation, but as the moment when arrogance crumbled before the silent force of justice. His father, who had endured years of contempt, chose the very table where he was being degraded to deliver the final blow. During the next dinner, the son didn't miss the opportunity to repeat his mockery. He toasted, smiled, and made snide remarks as if trying to erase his previous embarrassment with more arrogance. His father, sitting calmly, simply watched him unhurried. Deep down, he already knew that every word his son uttered was a noose he himself was placing around his neck. When his son's wife joined in the laughter, the father raised his hand and called for silence. The gesture was simple, but enough to freeze the room. "You think you've won, that you can call me nobody and move on, but this will be the last time you'll laugh at me." His voice, firm and calm, sounded like a sentence. The son tried to respond sarcastically, but unease was beginning to creep into his eyes. The father then pulled out a folded document, different from the will revealed earlier. It was a legal decision, dated and registered, that changed the family's entire financial structure. "You believed I was defenseless, but while you mocked me, I was preparing the groundwork. Today, you lose everything you thought was already yours." The son laughed nervously, trying to maintain control. "This is a bluff, you have no courage." But his trembling hand holding the wineglass betrayed him. The father calmly opened the paper and read aloud, "From this date, all properties, all assets and investments are in the name of an institution bearing my name. You who called me nobody will not be entitled to a single cent." The impact was immediate. The son dropped his glass, and his wife's eyes widened in disbelief. Despair gripped the couple. The daughter-in-law, always self-assured, now trembled, realizing that the luxurious future she had planned was crumbling before her eyes. The desperate son began to scream, saying it was unfair that his father couldn't do it, but the truth was he could, and had already done it. The old man didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten, simply let the facts speak for themselves. "You laughed at me, but I knew how to wait. Revenge, when served cold, has a taste you will never forget." The silence that followed was suffocating. There was no more laughter, only the sound of defeat etched in the eyes of those who believed they had already won. The father stood slowly, grabbed the keys he always carried with him, and walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned to his son and said calmly, "What you called weakness was just patience. What you called silence was just strategy. And what you called nobody is now someone who took everything from you." Those words were the final blade, cutting deep into the remaining arrogance. The door closed behind him, and the couple were left alone with the bitter taste of defeat. There was no shouting, no violence, just the cold certainty that they had lost the game to the one they called nobody. The following days were filled with heavy silence in that house. The son's wife, who had previously displayed pride and contempt whenever she looked at her father-in-law, now carried an uneasy feeling she couldn't hide. Deep down, she couldn't accept that this man, whom she had called useless and a failure, had been able to turn the tables so coldly. Curiosity consumed her. Who was this nobody, really? What secrets could be hidden behind that silent smile? She decided to investigate, believing she would find only crumbs of an unimportant past. But with each step, she realized there was much more beneath that simple appearance. The father-in-law she despised carried a story of sacrifice, pain, and overcoming that none of them had dared to imagine. It was while rummaging through old documents in the house that she found her first clue, a yellowed photograph of a young man in uniform, with medals on his chest and the firm gaze of someone who had faced real battles. It was her father-in-law. Beside the photo, newspaper clippings spoke of a war hero who had returned to rebuild his life from scratch. Shock ran down her spine. How could that same man, who today silently endured insults, have been celebrated as a hero? Her heart pounded, but at the same time her mind refused to accept it. After all, admitting this would be acknowledging that all her and her husband's contempt was rooted in ignorance and ingratitude. The next night, she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her father-in-law's young face in those photos, a stark contrast to the figure she had humiliated days before. She decided to dig deeper. She rummaged through safes and folders until she found company contracts, property records, and silent donations to hospitals and orphanages. She discovered that this nobody had supported entire families, helped strangers, and funded social projects without ever mentioning it to anyone. The entire life he had lived in silence now loomed large before her, and the more she discovered, the more the weight of shame crushed her. Her father-in-law was no nobody. He was a man greater than anyone at the table could ever dream of being. When she confronted her husband with the evidence, she expected him to react with the same surprise. But her son, overcome by pride, chose to deny it. "It doesn't matter. What's past is past. Today he's just a weak old man." The words were laced with venom, but the tremor in his voice revealed that the truth hit him hard. He didn't want to accept that he had called his own father, who in silence carried not only a fortune, but also a legacy of honor, a nobody. His wife, in turn, began to look at her father-in-law with different eyes. Arrogance dissolved into respect. even though it was tinged with the weight of guilt. It was as if finally she saw the person who had always been there, but whom she had chosen to ignore. The father, for his part, never made a point of rubbing their discoveries in their faces. He remained silent, as if nothing had changed. But the mere fact that his story had come to light was revenge enough. Now, when her son's wife saw him sitting silently, she no longer saw weakness, but rather contained greatness. The hidden past had been revealed, not through defensive words, but through facts that screamed louder than any insult. The shame that befell the couple was the highest price they could pay. After all, there is no greater punishment than discovering that the one they despised was in fact far greater than they will ever be. The weight of the revealed past still loomed large, but fate held an even crueler twist. Her son's wife, even shocked by the discoveries, couldn't abandon her old habits of manipulation. Too proud to admit defeat, she sought new ways to maintain control of the situation, convincing her husband they could still turn things around. But there was something she hadn't anticipated. Her father-in-law, the one she called Nobody, already knew her darkest secret. The same man she had tried to destroy in silence had been harboring evidence of the adultery she had been committing for months, hidden beneath the facade of an exemplary wife. And now, this secret would become the final weapon to finally crumble the couple's castle of illusions. At that dinner, the atmosphere was already charged with tension. The son struggled to maintain his composure, but the nervous looks betrayed him. His wife, for her part, smiled falsely, trying to appear in control. It was at that moment that the father, with his usual calm, placed a small envelope on the table. You believe you can manipulate everything, but you forget that nothing stays hidden forever. The son frowned curiously, and his wife froze as if sensing what was coming. The old man slowly opened the envelope, revealing photos, messages, and records of meetings at strategic times and places. His wife's eyes widened, pale, while her son stared in disbelief, unable to process what he saw. Her mask had slipped. The son stood up abruptly, his trembling voice a mixture of anger and pain. "This can't be true. You betrayed me." His wife tried to defend herself. Her words tumbled out. "It's not what it seems. This was all your father's plot to destroy me." But the evidence spoke louder. Every detail, every printed message, every photo stamped with dates and locations proved the inevitable. The silence in the room was suffocating. The son looked at his father, then at his wife, and felt as if his whole world had collapsed in a single instant. The humiliation he had harbored against his father now turned against him with an unbearable weight. The wife burst into tears, trying to grab her husband's hand, but he abruptly pulled her away. The father watched serenely without celebrating, simply letting the truth serve its own justice. "You called me nobody, but it was your own home you destroyed with lies and betrayal. Life always takes its toll, and today the bill has arrived." The son, who had previously laughed and mocked the man who gave him life, now felt the pain of betrayal corrode every part of his soul. The desperate wife defended herself with empty excuses, but no words could erase the reality laid bare for all to see. The truth, cold and relentless, had won. The father then stood up, took the envelope back, and said firmly, "I didn't need to raise my voice or dirty my hands. I simply waited for the right moment for you to reap what you sowed. Betrayal never lasts. Sooner or later the truth comes out." His wife fell silent, defeated, and his son, with tears of anger and shame, realized he had lost everything: trust, respect, and his very dignity. In that moment he understood the weight of each act against his father, and how life precisely returned the pain he had caused. The game of betrayal ended there, and the price was higher than anyone could have imagined. The mood was shattered by the shock of the revealed betrayal, but the father knew there was still a greater lesson to be taught. Throughout his life, he had sacrificed himself for his son, giving up dreams, forgoing personal achievements, so that he could have everything. And now, after hearing the word nobody come from the mouth of the one I loved most, I felt it was time to show the true weight of ingratitude. The son, stunned by the discovery of his wife's infidelity, could hardly imagine that more truths were about to crush what little pride he still had left. The father, serene, stood up once more and brought with him an aged wooden box. Inside was silent evidence of a lifetime of sacrifice. When he opened the box, he spread old notebooks, receipts, and letters yellowed with age across the table. Each piece of paper was a testament to the sacrifices he had made on his son's behalf. There were receipts for debts paid to spare him humiliation, letters declining job opportunities in other states because he didn't want to leave him alone, proof of expensive tuition paid for with entire nights of overtime work. The son stared in amazement at each document placed before him. His wife, still dejected, remained silent, unable to face such proofs of love and dedication. The father spoke in a firm but emotionally charged voice. "You called me nobody, but every victory you've had in life only happened because I sacrificed myself for you." Memories came flooding back. The son remembered the new clothes he'd worn as a child, the college tuition he'd paid for without ever wanting for anything, the mistakes he'd made that were covered up so his reputation wouldn't be tarnished. Everything was there before him, like a cruel mirror reflecting how blind and ungrateful he'd been. He wanted to speak, but his voice wouldn't come. His throat felt clogged with shame. His father continued, "I didn't need to prove anything to you, but you forced me to open this wound. It's not about money, it's about value. And you, by calling me nobody, forgot that what you are today was born of my blood, my sweat, and my struggle." Tears began to well in the son's eyes. For the first time, he felt small before this man he had so disdained. The pride that had fueled him seemed to shatter along with the evidence that now burned like embers in his conscience. His wife watched him silently, and for the first time, she felt something she had never felt for her father-in-law: respect. The weight of ingratitude transformed the dinner into a moral tribunal, where the sentence needed no judge, because the truth spoke for itself. The son, once arrogant, now bowed before the greatness of someone he should never have humiliated. The father closed the box, looked into his son's eyes, and calmly said, "There is no greater pain than ingratitude. But perhaps this is the lesson you needed to understand the value of a father. I am no one. I am the one who was always there when you needed me most. And even though you don't deserve it today, I still carry within me the love I never stopped feeling." These words, heavier than any document, fell like a final sentence. The son, in tears, was unable to respond. Ingratitude had left its mark, and now he understood that no insult could erase the truth of what his father represented. That key his father had held silently since their first dinner was no small detail. His son and his wife, steeped in arrogance, never imagined that this simple object could hide something so powerful. They believed it was merely the key to an old car, something worthless, worthy of the nobody they despised. But the reality was very different. His father had planned every step of his revenge with the calm of someone who knows how to wait for the right time to act. The keys were a symbol of what was to come. Not only physical doors would be opened, but entire truths and destinies would be exposed. That simple, seemingly banal gesture carried the weight of a revelation no one was prepared to face. One rainy night, as silence descended upon the house, the father walked to the garage with his keys in hand. The son, curious and still suspicious, followed, trying to extract some answer. The daughter-in-law, always anxious, followed, believing she would finally understand the mystery. The father stopped before an old gate, rusted with age, and entered the key. The metallic sound echoed like thunder in the night, paving the way for revelation. When the gate swung open, the sight that appeared before them took their breath away. A collection of luxury cars, preserved in secret, rare machines worth fortunes. The son's eyes widened, unable to understand how this man he called nobody kept an empire hidden right under everyone's noses. His wife, open-mouthed, tried to hide her interest, but her eyes shone with ambition. This is all yours?" she asked, stuttering. His father smiled serenely. "Not just mine, it's the fruit of a lifetime of work and choices you never imagined. While you spent time despising me, I built in silence." His son, overcome with shock, tried to process everything. Each car there was worth more than any possession he thought he owned, but his father didn't stop there. With another turn of the key, he opened a room next to the garage. Inside, safes and folders revealed contracts, investments, and assets registered in his name, carefully kept secret. That was the true heart of revenge, showing that the nobody was, in fact, the owner of everything. Their silence was broken by their father's firm voice. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. You said I had nothing, that I was nobody. But those keys unlocked not only iron doors, they also unlocked the truth. While you laughed at me, I held the power in my hands." The daughter-in-law, trying to regain control, forced a smile and tried to approach. "But now that we know we can take care of this together, as a family," the father raised his hand and interrupted her, looking firmly at them both. "You didn't even take care of me. Why would you take care of what I built?" Those words cut like a blade. The son lowered his head in shame, and his wife, at a loss for words, retreated in silence. The father closed the gates again, pocketed the keys, and said calmly, These keys don't just open doors, they reveal who truly holds the power here. You can keep calling me nobody, but know that each time I hold them, it will be a reminder that you have nothing without me. The phrase echoed like a final sentence. The mystery of the keys had become a silent weapon, crushing the couple's arrogance. Each metallic click now sounded like a cruel reminder that power was never in their hands. The son, even in the face of so many revelations, still clung to his wounded pride. Deep down, he believed he could restore his image in front of his wife by showing he still had some semblance of control. He then decided to organize another dinner, this time inviting close friends, to try to once again expose his father as a weak and worthless man. His intention was clear: to erase the previous defeats with one last stroke of arrogance. His wife, though shaken by the discoveries and the scandal of the betrayal itself, agreed to participate, believing they could, together, turn the tide. But what they didn't know was that this would be the stage for the final humiliation. The father, silent, accepted the invitation, already sensing the trap was set, and simply waited for the right moment to turn the tables on everyone. Evening arrived, and the table was set. The son, forcing a confident smile, made a point of singling out his father's place in the farthest corner, almost invisible. The guests laughed, oblivious to the tension in the air. Arrogantly, the son raised his glass, and before everyone said mockingly, "This is my father. He's never been anything, never built anything. He's only here out of obligation. After all, family is family, isn't it?" Suppressed laughter echoed through the room, but soon turned to an uncomfortable silence when the father calmly stood. His gaze was firm, and his voice charged with authority. "You see him as he wants you to see him, but the time has come for you to know the truth." The father then walked to the head of the table where his son sat and placed a folder full of documents before the guests. There were records of fraud, hidden debts, and shady dealings by his own son. While he tried to paint his father as a failure, the reality showed that he was the one carrying shameful secrets. The guest's eyes immediately turned to his son, now pale, unable to maintain his composure. His wife's eyes widened, realizing that this was the moment when everything fell apart. The humiliation he had tried to inflict on his father was turning into a sentence against himself. The son tried to protest, stammering, saying it was a lie, that the documents were fake, but the evidence was irrefutable. Signed contracts, overdue bills, messages revealing illicit dealings. Each exposed page was a blow to his reputation. The guests, previously complicit in the laughter, now murmured among themselves, shocked by what they saw. The wife, in despair, slowly walked away, as if she wanted to disappear. The father, however, remained calm. "You called me nobody, but it was your own greed that turned you into nothing. While I built in silence, you destroyed what little you had with lies and arrogance." The room was filled with a heavy silence, broken only by the sound of his son's labored breathing. He who had so often raised his voice to humiliate was now unable to say a single word. The father closed the folder and concluded calmly, "The humiliation you tried to inflict on me has backfired on you." And this was no accident. It was simply life returning the favor. The guests, embarrassed, began to stand, avoiding eye contact with their son. His wife, ashamed, had no strength to defend him. The humiliation was complete. Her once arrogant son was now reduced to a man stripped of honor before everyone. The dinner, which began with forced laughter and an attempt to keep up appearances, quickly turned into something much bigger. It was no longer just a family gathering. It was a silent tribunal, where every look weighed like an accusation, and every gesture carried the tension of a sentence about to be pronounced. The father, previously demeaned as a nobody, now stood before everyone as the central figure of the evening. His son and wife, who had schemed so hard to humiliate him, found themselves cornered, surrounded by their own lies, betrayals, and ingratitude. The table, once a scene of mockery, was now the stage of justice. The father's every word carried the force of years of silence, transformed into truth. The son, still trying to regain his composure, raised his voice in a desperate attempt. "This isn't fair. He's making it all up to destroy us." But no one believed his words anymore. The weight of the evidence already presented, combined with his history of arrogance, made his arguments ring hollow. The father, firm and unhurried, raised his hand for silence. "Justice doesn't need to be invented, son. It happens. You sowed contempt, lies, and betrayal. Today you're just reaping them." His wife, trembling, lowered her head, not daring to look anyone in the eye. The air in the room was thick, as if each guest were a juror in an inevitable trial. Calmly, the father revealed yet another piece of hidden evidence. A bank record showing mysterious transfers made by his son, hiding money from his own wife. The shock was immediate. She, who had always believed she was manipulating the situation, now discovered she was also a victim of her husband's shady schemes. Her cry echoed, "You deceived me too?" The son tried to defend himself, but his words were lost in the chaos. The father simply watched, as if watching the pieces of a game fall into place. "You united against me, but you didn't realize you were also destroying each other. Lies don't build alliances, only destruction." The room was tense. The son, sweating cold, fell into his chair, unable to maintain his mask. His wife wept, feeling the weight of her own fall and the betrayal within the betrayal. The father then concluded his sentence, "This dinner isn't just about me. It's about you facing the reflection of who you chose to be. I didn't need to raise my hand. I didn't need to shout. I simply waited for the right time, and the truth took care of revealing who you truly are." The words echoed like a judge's gavel concluding the judgment. There were no more defenses, no more illusions. The father stood up, calmly gathered the papers from the table and pocketed his keys. Before leaving, he looked at everyone present and said, "Life doesn't leave debts unpaid. Sooner or later, it collects. And today the collection has come for you." The silence that followed was deathly. The guests didn't dare say a single word. The son and his wife stood motionless, crushed by the truth, without the strength to even ask for forgiveness. The courtroom that night needed no jury because reality itself had declared the verdict guilty. The reckoning was complete, and the father's silent victory would resound forever. When the door closed behind the father that night, there was nothing but heavy silence. The son and his wife, once arrogant and smiling, were devastated by their own defeat. There were no shouts of victory, no outbursts of anger from the father. There was only the calm of someone who knew he had won without needing to raise his voice. This was the true triumph, proving that silence can be more devastating than any shout, that the truth is the most powerful weapon of all. The father, called Nobody, had risen as the man who unraveled every lie, exposed every betrayal, and left behind a legacy of justice that would never be erased. As he walked through the cold night, his keys jingling in his pocket, he thought about everything he had experienced. There was no satisfaction in seeing his son destroyed, but there was justice in showing that ingratitude and arrogance always have a price. His triumph lay not merely in guarding riches or secrets, but in showing that no amount of contempt could erase the truth of a lifetime of sacrifice and struggle. The son who had demeaned him before everyone would now forever bear the burden of having been unmasked. His wife, who had called him worthless, would forever remember being reduced to nothingness before the truth. The father's true triumph lay in his serenity. He didn't need to stoop to the level of those who humiliated him. He didn't need to use the same cruelty he suffered. He simply allowed time, combined with truth, to reveal who he truly was. This is the sweetest revenge, the kind that doesn't need to be announced, only experienced. He walked knowing that, even if they called it revenge, what he had done was return to his son and wife the exact reflection of their choices. It was like looking in the mirror and seeing not only his own face, but also the price of his own actions. Inside the house, the son and his wife were left alone, staring at the void left by their father. There were no more mocking words, no more manipulative plans. There was only silence and tears. The memory of that night would haunt them forever, because each revelation had been an open wound, impossible to heal. They had called their father Nobody, but now they knew that this Nobody was the true owner of everything, not just the riches, but the respect, the honor, and the ultimate victory. Triumph was not in their hands. It lay in the serenity of those who conquered without needing to get their hands dirty. And so this story ends with the certainty that justice, sooner or later, will find its way. The father, once seen as invisible, showed that silence holds strength no one imagines. He won not only with evidence but with dignity, and that is the greatest lesson. Never underestimate someone who chooses silence over anger, because often it is in this silence that revenge is built, cold, calculated, and relentless. If you've made it this far, subscribe to the channel, like it, and tell us what you thought of this story in the comments. Your opinion is part of our journey, and together we will continue to bring you intense narratives, full of poetic justice and unexpected twists.